Okay, welcome to our Erev Shabbat Parashat class. Parashat Emor, the great bridge that we count. We are standing on the great historic day of Lag LaOmer, but it should not elude us that today or tomorrow is the parasha, which introduces us first to this counting, which ended up being capturing a phrase and a time period and a concept called Sefirat HaOmer. The makor, the source for this indeed is now a parasha, and it's a remarkable mitzvah. I say that because it is the only time that there is a national obligation to count something. There are certainly individual obligations to count in different contexts in the Torah. A woman who's nidah counts 7 days of purity. A person who's a misorah counts 7 days of purity as well. And there are other similar mitzvot that involve counting towards something, counting up and counting down. But the only national mitzvah for a people to count is indeed the one that we find ourselves in the midst of right now. Not only is it intriguing because the mitzvah doesn't really tell us explicitly why, because even in the Torah Shebe'al Peh, in the Gemara Mishnayot, there's not really a specific historical commemoration for which we commemorate and reflect back to upon this counting. There are many, many different commentators, theories, possibilities as to the purpose of the Sefirah that we call Sefirat HaOmer. The most well-known being, of course, that we are reflecting upon a sort of commemoration where in Am Yisrael, upon leaving Mitzrayim on the 15th day of the month of Nisan, the next day began counting down to a day that they understood from Moshe Rabbeinu's first communication to Kadosh Baruch Hu, a day that would be 50 days later at the giving of the Torah and the revelation of Kadosh Baruch Hu on Mount Sinai, Matan Torah. And eagerly, with eager anticipation of receiving their Torah, and in a conceptual way, with in anticipation of finally being able to realize in a tangible way their objective of creation, the objective of Am Yisrael, and thereby, by extension of that, the creation of mankind, which is to worship a God through his Torah. They counted up to a great elevated day, and thus we count up in numbers. There is another theory that matches the counting in the gap of time that is more of a conceptual commemoration, wherein the Or HaChaim conveys and really makes an astounding observation, and that is that Am Yisrael, who were stooped in a paganistic society, Hachamim speak of this 49th level of Tum'ah, of course, to align with the 49 days, that gap between Yetziat Mitzrayim and Matan Torah, that we were, yes, a holy people and descendants of our great forefathers, but by and large, culturally, just entrenched in this lifestyle that was not very different from our Egyptian neighbors, and as we said, paganistic. And somehow, 7 weeks later, they were semi-prophets on the foot of Har Sinai, meriting to hear and receive the extension of God, the Torah Kedoshah. That is something is unrealistic and unnatural. And Or HaChaim explains, as an impure person might count 7 days, we count 7 to the power of 2, 7 sevens. It's an exponential, almost explosive type of counting, wherein we, and somehow, with a concentrated effort, taking advantage of every single day, we're able to do what would normally look like a natural transformation and transform ourselves from lower to higher levels of connections to God and merit receiving the Torah. Okay, so we have a practical and a conceptual historical commemoration. However, that and many other theories still do not account for what I call the Great Bridge. And what do I mean by that? The only way to explain that is really to open up our Chumashim in Parashat Hashavua, Parashat Emor, the Perek Kav Gimel, chapter 23. And of course, this is the parasha, one of the parashiot that present to us the holidays, the various laws, practices, and korbanot of the holidays, the others being Pinehas and Re'eh, and trickling throughout the Torah. This is the first major source of the calendar of our holidays in the Torah. And in Perek Kav Gimal, Pasuk Tet Vav, verse 15, the Torah instructs us as follows. I'm going to actually take you back a little before that, and that is Pasuk Yud, where Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, "Daber b'nei Yisrael v'amarta lehem, ki tabou el haaretz asher ani noten lachem u'ktzartem et kasiraha." When you come to the land and you harvest the fields, you're going to bring the first of your harvest, what we'll call an omer, which is really a measure, to the Kohen and the Bet HaMikdash. And it describes what that's going to look like. And it says in the Torah, in Pasuk Yud Dalet, Lechem Chali v'Charmel lo tochlu ad esem hayom hazeh. Prior to bringing that korban, you will not be allowed to eat bread of grain in any form until you offer that sacrifice. This became known as the korban ha'omer. The korban ha'omer essentially is a korban which, when brought, allows us to consume and to benefit from all of the barley products. Wheat products are not ready in that agricultural society just yet. The barley products that were grown from the ground, up till that point, it was called hadash, the new products. The demarcation line, the cutoff, is the 16th day, Mimaharat Shabbat, which traditionally we know as the 16th day, the day after the first day of Nisan, 16th day of Nisan. When we bring that korban, then everything prior to it, all the harvested barley grain is called yashan, old. And now we can partake of what we have already harvested prior to that from the korban omer, as the Torah just told us, and on. We know that as the laws of yashan. And according to Sephardim, those laws are still in play even outside of Israel today in the United States of America because of the unique two harvests that is really in play, and one must know his stuff and how to navigate purchasing various products at different times of the year in America. Okay, that's Kurban HaOmer. So now we go to the next Pasuk Tetva. And here's the instruction of the Mizvah of which we speak today. Usfartem lachem machorat haShabbat miyom aviachem et omer hatinufa. What we see is that God instructs us to count. And the counting is not an independent counting. The counting is from Mahurat HaShabbat, which again is referring to not Shabbat, seventh day of the week, but Shabbat, the first day, the resting day of the first day of Pesach, which is the 15th of Nisan. The next day afterwards was the 16th of Nisan. Count the Omer, that first barley offering of lifting, it's called, and that's what we did in the procedure of offering that korban. Count Sheva Shabbatot Timimot Tihiyana. As we know, 7 whole weeks equals 49 days. Pasuk Tezayin. Ad Machorat Shabbat Shivi'it. Now you already told us that it's 7 full weeks. And that means, of course, you're counting until the 7th week. Tispiru Hamishim Yom, count 50 days, meaning you're going to hit a point afterwards will be the 50th day. The Torah here is purposely attaching the end of the count, which we can do math, but attaching the end of the count to another day of significance. And at that day of significance, which we know as the holiday of Shavuot, i.e. Matan Torah, v'hikrabtem mincha hadasha ladonai. You'll offer another sacrifice. It's going to be called mincha hadasha, a new flour offering. And the Torah goes on to describe, it's called bikurim as well, that this is a korban brought in the holiday of Shavuot, along with the unique korban of Shavuot called kipsei aseret, korban shilamim. There is shtei halechem. There is an offering of 2 large loaves of bread, and they are offered from the first harvest of the new flour from wheat of the year. What's the purpose and function of that korban? That allows in the Bet HaMikdash all flour offerings for up to now, the wheat harvested up to now were called Hadash, new, and couldn't be offered in the Bet HaMikdash. At this cutoff point, which is the 50th day from the counting and the bringing of this Mincha Hadashah, this new flour offering, this Bikurim Korban, now the Bet HaMikdash, whenever they offer flour offerings of Korban Mincha, it can be of that harvested wheat from the new harvest, from anything prior to that, they now become Jeshan. So in other words, what Korban HaOmer does for the rest of the nation with the new barley offering, the Bikurim on Shavuot offering does for the Bet HaMikdash with the new wheat offering. Clearly what happened here is that this counting was given coordinates. As I said, there's a bridge. In other words, there are bookends to the Sefirah, what we call Sefirah Ta'omed. On one end, we have Pesach, on the other end, Shavuot, but not only that. There are bookends of Korbanot. On one end, we have Korban HaOmer, and on the other end, we have Korban Bikurim. First barley offering, first wheat offering. And so clearly, the Torah Kedoshah, besides whatever independent and conceptual reason we can give to why we have to count, the Torah is connecting not only 2 holidays, but 2 korbanot and bridging them together. You can almost picture sort of like a jump rope has 2 handles, and you have this rope in between that is the counting that attaches the 2 ends. And again, a bridge of 2 islands, if you will. It's incumbent upon us to understand what is the significance of attaching not only the 2 holidays together, but these 2 korbanot together, and what function does counting take in doing so? It's because of this relationship that commentators like the Ramban like to look at this period of time between Pesach and Shavuot as a elongated, as a extending Chol HaMoed period of time, almost like we have in the holiday of Sukkot until Shemini Aseret. From Pesach to Shavuot, the 7-week or 6-week Chol HaMoed, so to speak. So I like to tap in to answer this question, the theory of and the comment of the Abarbanel, the great Abarbanel. The Abarbanel takes the following notice. He observes that this wheat offering, this barley offering, this Korban HaOmer, is really very rudimentary, mundane animal food. It's offered as a Korban in its raw state. It's not even processed barley. Barley is animal food. You feed it to cows. Yeah, your wife can throw in barley in the mushroom barley soup. And by and large, in volume, and a regular dietary habit, it's animal food, especially when it's not processed and turned into flour. And Am Yisrael, truthfully, when they were miraculously extracted from this Misraim hellhole, and they were redeemed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, yes, we were descendants of holy forefathers, absolutely traditional people with a holy fabric, you can say, and certain values and traditions, and quite remarkable in Munah, faith in God. But we were, to a great extent, undeveloped people, not sophisticated at all in terms of a set values, undirected. We were, as we said, steeped in a paganistic culture, and we had really no divine lifestyle. We in the morning did not wake up to a set of habits and laws and direction. We were not yet a sophisticated, spiritually, divinely oriented people. We were very similar and much more similar to the rest of the peoples on earth, animals, if you will, undeveloped. And on the other end observes the Abarbanel, there is the Minha Hadasha, there is the new, there is the Bikurim, there is the first Korban offering of flour. And this flour not only is people food, so to speak, but it is presented as a Korban, ground into flour, developed and transformed into the most higher order food that we have, i.e. bread that gets its own distinct beracha, because it transforms in its flour and leavens, of course, from a coarse grain to a refined grain to a fine flour, and then to a leavening and rising, beautiful, scrumptious loaf of bread. And that is people food, explains Abarbanel. And we somehow develop into a full-fledged, sophisticated, very well-directed and moral nation on the back end. And how did we get from the unsophisticated and undeveloped to the opposite? Through this 7-week period of time, we walked the bridge. And that bridge is a Sephirah, is an Omer. And what we did is that we didn't look at an unclimbable mountain, and we didn't scoff at and be discouraged from the possibility of speaking to God and transforming ourselves into a nation subservient with 613 commandments. Rather, we took it one step at a time. And with one step at a time, every time elevating ourselves, looking up to the next rung of the ladder and taking one more step, we eventually, incrementally, got to the point where we were a sophisticated people, deserving of receiving the Torah, and then actually receiving the greatest gift in the history of mankind. You know, I told a story on this subject on the last day of Pesach in the shul here in Bet Torah, that a great person that was a well-known Baal Teshuvah, Rabbi Uri Zohar, who was in the 1970s a very famous movie star and celebrity in Eretz Yisrael, but a person who lived a very lowly, promiscuous, unattractive, disgusting lifestyle, as a secular person might, but him to a great degree. And somehow, in the course of his life and his interactions, found his way creeping slowly and painfully back to Judaism and his roots and his Torah Kedusha, and repented, made teshuvah, studied Torah, became a Talmid Chacham, and eventually a big rabbi who became an inspiration to others, and was, you could say, maybe of the most impactful person in terms of bringing others back to Teshuvah. And once in Eretz Yisrael, as my curiosity is often piqued with remarkable people in Am Yisrael, I decided it was before a seminar at Magen David High School that I was going to speak, and I always wanted ideas to inspire our teenagers. And I decided I was going to find Rabbi Uri Zohar. And so I asked who are the great advisors of the land of Israel, cab drivers, and where could you find Rabbi Uri Zohar? And he gave me all types of directions. Yamina, Smola, Yashar, Yashar, Yasar, soft, Yamina, Smola. You don't just take me, do me a favor. He said, Moshe Shabbat, I'll take you. So he takes me, drops me off in an apartment building. I find the apartment somehow. I knock on the door, cold and uninvited. And he opens the door and he says, Shalom. I explained to him, I'm just a teacher, Rabbi in Brooklyn, New York, at the yeshiva, and I'd like to speak to him if it's okay. I said, fine, I'm on a phone call, you have to wait. I sat in the side room, waited for 20 minutes as he finished what I shouldn't have, but I sort of overheard the phone call. Very interesting, remarkable subject and person he was dealing with. And then at the end, he came and sat with me very patiently and nicely. And I pretty much interviewed him and asked him some questions about his life and his past. And then I had the nerve to ask him the following. I said, Rabbi, don't you sometimes reflect on your old lifestyle and who you used to be with some type of guilt? And he told me unabashedly, in no uncertain terms, absolutely not. That person was a behemoth. He wasn't a person. He knew nothing. He had no Torah knowledge, certainly. He had no sophistication. He had no way of knowing better in any of his actions. He was someone different. I escaped that person. And now I am who I am. He looked back with no guilt. And to me, it was such a refreshing and remarkable way of looking at himself. He wasn't trapped in himself. He never made excuses for himself. He moved on and he was okay with it. Of course, it was a difficult and painstaking process, but he got there and looked back and said, you know what? That's the old me. And he was able somehow to escape the old person. In my many years in Bet Torah, in the last 35 years, creating programs and soliciting and recruiting people to learning into classes and programs, many, many times I've got the comment from people as I try to, nicely recruit them, not pushing too hard, almost as if it was a prepared speech. I got to tell you something about myself. Well, why do you got to do that? I'm not asking you right now. And so many people over the years go on to explain to me what about their unique life and their schedule, which prevents them from committing to some type of study and class and system, and basically remain trapped in a narrative that they created for themselves, and somehow have rationalized and convinced themselves that this is not for them, instead of just being able, not taking a deep plunge, but an incremental small step, and realizing that that is extremely doable in just about anyone's life, and be able, after taking that step, to look down and say, that wasn't so bad. The great thing about a ladder is that on one hand, when you take a couple of steps, you look down and you realize you got up there. On the other hand, there's always another one coming. As Yaakov Avinu saw in his dream. It doesn't end really. It goes to the Shamayim. And that is exactly what Sefirat Ta'amid trains us to do. Am Yisrael, the great people of faith and tradition and heritage with great descendancy, only became who we became because we were willing to step out of ourselves and not get caught in our past, not make excuses for ourselves. But we did it in not an unnatural way, but a real practical, divinely directed counting in which every single step and every single day is meaningful and realistic, and we embrace it and we appreciate it. And we then, looking down upon after 5 and 10 and 15 steps, are very encouraged with that we really exalted and elevated ourselves to levels that we would have made excuses for ourselves prior and didn't imagine. And on the other hand, are always willing to take the next step. And that's how, as a nation, we developed and became God's treasure and were worthy of receiving Hashem's great gift to mankind, which is the Torah, and how, as individuals, in this great period of time, Sefirat Ta'amid, build ourselves and get closer and forge that relationship and connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, until we use this bridge from Pesach and Korban HaOmer to become a stepping stone and a tool to eventually build ourselves on the back end to Hag Shavuot, to the Mincha Hadasha, to the Korban of Bikurim, and be worthy of facing HaKadosh Baruch Hu and accepting His Torah at the end of this great journey. Baruch Adonai L'Olam, Amen, Amen. Shabbat Shalom.